The hall of the Galactic Council was filled with shining lights and strange colors. Tall alien figures sat in high chairs, their eyes glowing, their bodies wrapped in robes of silver and gold. It was a place where humans were almost never invited, for humans were seen as weak, noisy, and uncivilized. And yet tonight, one human stood in the center of that hall, holding something in his hands, something the aliens had never seen before. His name was Daniel, a simple musician from Earth. He was not a soldier, not a scientist, not a leader, but only a man who loved to play music. In his hands, he carried the Xenotone, a strange stringed instrument made from wood and crystal. To humans, it was a tool of beauty. To aliens, it looked like a broken piece of junk. The aliens laughed the moment they saw it. One tall creature with 4 arms shouted, "Is that your weapon, human? Do you plan to kill us with noise?" Another, with scales shining like metal, hissed, "Primitive toys, nothing more." The laughter spread across the hall like fire, echoing from wall to wall. Daniel stood still, his heart beating fast. He could feel their hatred, their mockery, their disbelief. He was told to play, to show what humans called art. The council wanted to be entertained, or perhaps they wanted to humiliate him further. But Daniel remembered his father's words. When they laugh, play from your soul, for the soul is stronger than laughter. He placed the Xenotone against his shoulder and closed his eyes. The hall fell into a silence of expectation, broken only by whispers and snickers. Daniel breathed slowly, letting the weight of the moment press down on him. He thought of Earth, of green fields, of the sound of rain, of children laughing, of the voice of his mother singing. And then, with trembling fingers, he drew the first note. The sound was soft, almost too soft for such a grand hall. It flowed like water, gentle but clear. The aliens leaned forward, curious, for they expected chaos, but instead they heard something pure. The laughter began to die, replaced by confusion. Daniel's fingers moved again, and the Xenotone sang louder, brighter, reaching every corner of the room. One alien frowned, feeling a strange heaviness in his chest. Another blinked rapidly, as if something had entered her eyes. They did not understand, for their kind had never known what humans called music of the heart. Daniel's tune was not just sound, it was memory, it was sorrow, it was love. He was telling them a story without words. The story of humanity, of struggle, of hope. Each note carried pain and joy woven together. It was not the roar of war, but the whisper of the soul. The council members shifted uncomfortably, their mocking faces beginning to fade. But still, some tried to resist, crossing their arms, pretending not to care. Daniel opened his eyes slightly and saw them. He knew then that his music had power, more power than their ships or weapons. And so he played deeper, stronger, faster. The Xenotone cried with him, screamed with him, sang with him. The hall shook not from force, but from the weight of emotion. At the back of the hall, a young alien child who had been brought as a guest began to cry. Her father, a warrior with skin like stone, looked at her in shock. Aliens did not cry. They had no word for tears, yet his daughter's face was wet. The warrior's own chest ached, and he gripped his chair tightly. He could not stop the memory of his fallen brothers, warriors lost in wars he had tried to forget. Daniel saw it, he felt it, and he poured even more of himself into the Xenotone. The aliens no longer laughed. They stared wide-eyed, their hearts trembling in ways they had never known. Some lowered their heads, some clenched their fists, some looked away in shame. For the first time, they were not mocking a human, they were listening to him, truly listening. The song rose higher, breaking like waves against stone walls. It carried the ache of mothers, the courage of fathers, the dreams of children. It was humanity itself, fragile yet unbroken, weak yet unyielding. The air itself seemed alive, vibrating with a truth that could not be denied. Even the council leader, a massive figure with golden eyes, sat frozen, unable to speak. At last, Daniel struck the final note. It lingered in the hall, soft and endless, until it faded into silence. The silence was heavier than the laughter had been. No one moved, no one dared to speak. The human lowered his Xenotone slowly and bowed his head. In that silence, the aliens understood something they could not explain. The human had come as a fool in their eyes, but now he stood as something else, not a warrior of blood, but a warrior of the heart. And though none of them admitted it aloud, they knew they would never forget this night. For the humans' music had broken their pride and touched something deeper than fear. The mockery was gone, and in its place was awe. The hall of the Galactic Council would never be the same again. The hall still echoed with silence, a silence heavier than steel. Every alien eye was fixed on the human, the musician with the strange instrument. They had laughed before, but now no one dared to speak, no one dared to move. Daniel's fingers rested on the Xenotone, but his heart was still racing. He could feel the weight of their stares, like sharp blades pressing against his skin. Yet in that moment, Daniel understood something powerful. The music had not only entered their ears, it had entered their memories. He could see it in their faces, the way their eyes shifted, the way their shoulders tensed. They were remembering something they had long buried. And he realized the Xenotone was not just an instrument. It was a mirror. The aliens were seeing themselves through human sound. A warrior who had fought endless battles now heard the cries of his fallen brothers. A leader who had ruled with iron felt the loneliness of his own throne. A mother who had never known tenderness felt warmth in her chest, a warmth she did not understand. Every note had planted seeds of memory deep inside their minds. Daniel did not speak, for words would ruin what the music had created. Instead, he lifted the Xenotone again, his fingers trembling. This time, the hall did not laugh. Instead, the council leaned forward, waiting. Even the great leader with golden eyes tilted his head slightly, as if curious. Daniel drew a deep breath and let the strings sing once more. The second song was softer, slower. It was not a storm, but a river, flowing gently across every heart. The notes carried the sound of children playing in the fields of earth, the laughter of friends around a fire, the soft whispers of a mother to her child. It was not war, it was not sorrow, it was memory wrapped in tenderness. The aliens shifted again, but this time they did not resist. They closed their eyes, letting the strange warmth pass through them. Some felt small flashes, images they could not explain, a sky they had never seen, a breeze they had never felt, a smile they had never known. It was as if the music was giving them borrowed memories. Daniel himself was lost in the sound. He forgot the hall, the council, even his fear. He was back on Earth, standing in the rain as a child, listening to the voice of his father. He remembered the festivals, the joy of dancing lights, the smell of bread in the oven. He poured it all into the Xenotone, and the hall trembled with life. An alien with wings of silver gasped softly. She had never known what it meant to hold someone, yet she felt the weight of it now. Another, covered in metal-like scales, clenched his fists as if holding back tears. A being with no mouth let out a strange vibration, half cry, half sigh. The music was pulling emotions from places they had believed empty. At the far corner, the young alien child wiped her face. Her father, the stone-skinned warrior, tried to comfort her, but his own chest was heavy. He remembered holding her when she was newly born, though his kind never spoke of such things. The memory cut him deeper than any blade, yet he could not look away. The Xenotone had chained him to his own past. The council leader finally raised a hand, but not to stop the human, only to steady himself. His golden eyes glowed brighter, but not with anger, with something else. It was the reflection of memories, of pain he had buried under centuries of power. He whispered to himself, though no one else heard, "This is impossible." Daniel continued, his hand steady now. He knew the truth. The Xenotone was not only telling his story, it was unlocking theirs. Each alien, no matter how proud or cruel, carried shadows inside them. and music had found the path to those shadows, pulling them into the light. The song reached its final verse, slow and fragile. It was the sound of goodbyes, the sound of holding someone for the last time. Daniel's eyes filled with water, but he did not stop. He let his tears fall as part of the melody. The Xenotone wept with him, each string vibrating like a heartbeat. When the final note faded, the hall was not silent. It was alive with trembling breaths. No one clapped, no one mocked, no one dared break the spell. They sat with their own memories, chained by the human sound. And in that moment, Daniel knew the battle had only begun, not of guns or steel, but of memory and soul. The Xenotone's final note still floated in the air, like a ghost that refused to leave. The hall was filled with heavy silence, yet inside that silence, there was movement. Not movement of bodies, but of hearts, of minds, of memories. Each alien carried something within them now, something they could not describe. For the first time, the proud council of many species felt the same thing at once. Pain, longing, and a strange warmth. It was as if Daniel's music had carved open their chests and left behind a flame. Small, but impossible to ignore. The winged alien with silver feathers pressed her hands to her chest. Her kind had never known love as humans knew it. They bonded only for survival. And yet, the music had forced an image into her mind. An image of holding another close, of whispering soft promises. She trembled, confused, almost frightened, but unable to let go of the vision. The warrior with scales of iron stared at his hands. He remembered battles fought long ago. The cries of those who had fallen returned to him with every note Daniel played. He had buried those voices in the darkness of his mind, but now they screamed again. And for the first time, he bowed his head. The alien with no eyes, only a face of smooth crystal, made a sound, a low vibration that echoed through the chamber. His people were known as emotionless, as beings of pure logic, but his crystal body glowed faintly, and his chest quivered. He had no word for sorrow, yet the Xenotone had given him its meaning. Daniel stood quietly in the center. He had stopped playing, but the music still echoed in their souls. He could feel it like ripples spreading across water. Each alien carried their own memory now, but those memories were not isolated. They connected, weaving a web across the hall. Enemies who had hated each other for centuries now shared the same silence. A silence heavy with shared pain. Two rival leaders locked eyes, and for the first time, they did not glare with hatred. Instead, they saw a reflection of their own grief in the other. The music had tied them together without a single word. The young alien child who had wept earlier clung to her father. She whispered, "Make it stop," though she did not truly want it to. Her father, the stone-skinned warrior, had no words. He simply held her, his rough hand trembling. For he knew the truth. His daughter had felt what he had spent a lifetime denying. The council leader rose slowly, towering above them all. His golden eyes burned with a fire no one had ever seen before. He looked at Daniel, the small human who dared to play. "Your music," he said, voice heavy. It should not be possible. And yet, even as he spoke, his voice cracked. Daniel said nothing. He only bowed his head slightly. He knew words would break the fragile chain his music had created. He wanted them to feel, not to think. And so, instead of answering, he raised the Xenotone again. The hall leaned forward, unable to resist. The new melody was different, sharper, stronger, like thunder wrapped in fire. It was not only sorrow now. It was rage, courage, and defiance. The notes cut through the hall like blades. And yet, within that fire was beauty. It was the cry of humanity, small but unbroken, weak but unyielding. The aliens reacted violently, some gripping their seats, others gasping. The iron-scaled warrior let out a roar, remembering comrades lost to senseless war. The crystal-faced alien glowed brighter, shaking with vibrations he could not control. The winged woman spread her wings wide, trembling as she felt her heart race for the first time. The music was no longer only memory, it was truth. Every species felt the same echo. They were not just individuals anymore. They were pieces of one vast chorus. Daniel's Xenotone had woven them into a single thread. Different voices, different lives, but bound by the same invisible song. The hall had become something new, something alive. The council members could not laugh now, could not mock. They were prisoners of the music, trapped within their own awakened hearts. Daniel's eyes were wet again, but this time not from sorrow. He felt something larger than himself, something vast, as if the whole galaxy was breathing through his strings. The song ended not in silence, but in a hum that seemed to live on. The aliens sat broken, united, trembling. They looked at one another with new eyes. And though none of them admitted it aloud, they all knew the same truth. The echoes of this music would never die, not in their lifetimes, not in their species. The echoes of the Xenotone still lingered in the hall. No one dared speak, no one dared laugh. Every alien sat in silence, chained to the memories Daniel's music had forced upon them. For the first time in centuries, the mighty council looked small, vulnerable, almost human. But not all were ready to surrender. At the far end of the chamber, a figure rose tall and proud. It was General Crather, a warlord of the iron-scaled species. His chest was broad, his armor shone like molten steel, his voice like thunder. He had led armies across a dozen star systems, crushing worlds beneath his command. He glared at Daniel with eyes burning like coals. "This is weakness," he roared, his voice cutting through the silence. "Do not be fooled by the tricks of this human." His fist slammed against the table, sending vibrations through the floor. "We are warriors. We are rulers, not fragile creatures of song." Some of the council stirred at his words. They wanted to believe him, to cling to their pride. For to admit that a single human with strings of crystal could shake their hearts was terrifying. And yet, even as Crather spoke, his hands trembled. He felt something burning in his chest, a wound that music had opened. Daniel did not move. He only looked at the general calmly. The Xenotone rested in his arms like a living thing, waiting. Daniel's silence was louder than Crather's rage. It forced the warrior to keep speaking, desperate to prove himself strong. "I will not bow to sound. I will not shed tears like a weakling," he thundered. But even as he shouted, his mind betrayed him. The notes of the last song echoed inside, dragging out memories long buried. He saw his brothers, his soldiers, their faces stained with blood and fire. He heard their cries, their laughter, the silence that followed when they were gone. For years, he had hidden it behind armor, behind power, but the music tore it free. His roar faltered, breaking into something raw. The council watched as the mighty general staggered back a step. His fists clenched, his teeth grinding, yet his eyes glistened. One tear fell, heavy, shining, carving a line across his scaled cheek. The hall gasped, for warriors of his kind did not cry. They did not even know how. Crather shook his head violently, ashamed, but more tears came, streaming down like cracks in stone. He dropped to his knees, his pride collapsing before them all. The council leader rose, his golden eyes glowing. He looked at Daniel, then at Crather, and for the first time, he too was silent. Daniel lifted the Xenotone again, but this time he did not play a song of rage. Instead, he played something gentle, soft, like the touch of rain. It wrapped around the general like a blanket, not mocking, not judging. It simply embraced his grief, letting him weep without shame. The hall itself seemed to breathe with him. The other council members felt it too. They had seen the strongest among them fall, not by blade, not by war, but by music. Their own pride cracked at the sight. They realized that if even Crather could not resist the truth of the Xenotone, then neither could they. The walls of arrogance that had stood for centuries began to crumble. Some lowered their heads, others pressed their hands to their chests. They were breaking one by one, not through force but through feeling, and Daniel, standing alone with his instrument, became more than a performer. He became a mirror to their souls, a voice for their unspoken pain. He had broken their pride without lifting a weapon. Crather finally looked up, his face wet, his voice shaking. I hear them, he whispered, barely able to speak. My brothers, they're with me again. The hall trembled with the weight of his confession. And for the first time, the council was united in something greater than power. The Xenotone's strings hummed softly as Daniel ended the song. No one laughed, no one mocked. The sound of tears and trembling breaths filled the hall. Pride had been shattered, and in its place stood something dangerous. The beginning of change. The hall had changed. Moments ago, it had been a place of mockery and arrogance. Now it was a place of trembling silence. The sound of General Crather's sobs still echoed faintly, a sound no one thought they would ever hear. If the strongest warrior of the iron-scaled species could be broken, then what hope did the others have? Daniel stood in the center, his Xenotone resting against his chest. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply waited. He could feel the air shift, thick with sorrow, but also heavy with something new. It was not just grief now. It was the stirring of connection, the birth of something greater. The council members looked at one another uneasily. Enemies who had hated each other for centuries now sat side by side. They had felt the same pain, heard the same song, shed the same tears. And in that realization, the walls between them began to crack. The golden-eyed leader rose slowly from his throne. His towering form cast a shadow across the chamber. He had ruled the council with iron judgment, never bending, never softening. Yet tonight his voice was quieter, heavier when he spoke. Human, he said, your sound has broken what war could not. Daniel bowed his head slightly, but did not reply. He knew words were no longer enough. Only the Xenotone could carry the truth forward. And so he lifted the instrument once more, his hand steady. The aliens leaned forward, unable to resist, their hearts already chained by expectation. This time, Daniel did not play sorrow. He did not play rage. He played unity. The first notes were soft, weaving together like threads of silk, then stronger, rising and falling, carrying voices that were not just human, but universal. The Xenotone became a bridge, binding sound into something alive. The hall began to glow as the crystal walls caught the vibration. The notes bounced, echoed, spread, until it felt as if the music came from every direction. The aliens gasped, some reaching for their chests, some closing their eyes. For the first time, they did not hear only their own pain. They heard each other. A scaled warrior heard the sorrow of the winged woman. The winged woman felt the longing of the crystal-faced being. The stone-skinned father felt the love of his child, and the child felt the grief of her father. Species that had never understood one another now shared the same melody. They were no longer many, they were one. Daniel's eyes were wet as he played harder, pouring everything into the Xenotone. He thought of Earth, of his people, of humanity's endless fight to survive together. He thought of unity born not from power, but from compassion. And he gave that gift to the galaxy through his strings. The Xenotone roared with life, not violent, but unshakable. The golden-eyed leader gripped the edge of his throne. His chest trembled as memories he had buried surfaced. The cries of his people, the weight of leadership, the endless wars he had commanded. He saw now what he had refused to see, that every species carried the same wounds, and the human had stitched those wounds together with music. The chamber filled with a chorus of voices, though no one spoke. The song itself became their shared language. It was laughter and tears woven into one, hope and sorrow bound into harmony. Even those who had sworn eternal hatred to one another looked across the hall differently. Enemies became brothers, strangers became kin. The young alien child who had cried earlier now smiled faintly. She held her father's hand tightly, not with fear, but with warmth. The stone-skinned warrior looked at her and realized she understood something he had never taught. something he himself had only just learned, that unity was stronger than war. Daniel played until his hands ached, until his breath came in gasps. The Xenotone's strings glowed faintly under his touch. It was as if the instrument itself knew what it carried. A truth that weapons could not give, a bond that time could not erase. When the final note rang out, it did not fade quickly. It lingered, endless, eternal. The council did not cheer, did not clap. They sat together in silence. But this silence was not heavy like before. It was light, filled with shared breath, shared hearts, shared memory. The uniting song had changed them, and none of them would ever be the same again. The last note of the Xenotone faded into the air like smoke dissolving into the night sky. For a long time, no one moved, no one dared to breathe too loudly. The chamber of the Galactic Council, once filled with mocking laughter and thunderous voices, now held only silence. But this silence was not empty. It was alive, heavy, and sacred. Daniel lowered the Xenotone slowly, his arms trembling from the weight of his own song. Sweat clung to his forehead, his eyes still wet with tears. He felt drained, as if the instrument had taken not only his strength, but his very soul. Yet he stood tall, because he knew what he had done could never be undone. The council members sat frozen in their seats, their faces no longer masks of arrogance, no longer twisted in mockery. They looked human, broken, vulnerable. Some still wiped their eyes, some bowed their heads, some stared at Daniel as though seeing him for the first time. The golden-eyed leader leaned back into his throne. For centuries, his voice had commanded fear. His words had ended wars and begun them. But now, when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. He closed it again, realizing that silence was the only language strong enough to follow the song. General Crather, the iron-scaled warrior, still knelt on the floor. His hands pressed tightly to his chest, as if trying to keep his heart from breaking further. The tears had not stopped, but neither had his pride. It was simply reshaped. He had been defeated, not by battle, not by strength, but by truth. And though it burned him, it also freed him. The winged woman folded her silver feathers close around her body. Her kind had never known tenderness, but now she held herself as if she had just felt it for the first time. The crystal-faced being glowed faintly, his smooth features trembling with colors never seen before. Even the stone-skinned warrior, once unshakable, now sat silently holding his daughter's small hand. The child leaned against him, her smile faint but pure. Daniel looked at them all and realized what had happened. The silence was not a void, it was a bridge. It was the sound of enemies breathing together, the sound of hearts no longer locked in cages. The silence after music was the truest part of the song. It was proof that something greater than sound itself had been born. The humans on Earth would never believe it, he thought. That one small song could break the walls of species, of hatred, of war. Yet here he was, standing in the center of the most powerful council in the galaxy, and no one dared laugh at him anymore. They sat as students before a teacher, waiting without words. The golden-eyed leader finally stood. His towering figure still commanded power, but his voice was no longer thunder. When he spoke, it was quiet, uncertain, yet honest. "We have misjudged humanity," he said slowly. "Your kind carries a strength we did not see." His words echoed softly through the chamber. But no one challenged him, no one mocked. Even Crather remained silent, tears still dripping onto the floor. For once, silence was agreement, not defiance. And the silence itself felt stronger than any speech could be. Daniel bowed his head, not in pride, but in respect. He knew the silence was not his alone. It belonged to them all. The Xenotone rested in his hands, glowing faintly, as if it too understood. The music was over, but its echo would live on, not in strings, not in sound, but in the silence that followed. The chamber of the council had been a place of pride, of power, of endless words. Now it was a place of quiet hearts. No treaties were signed, No battles were ended that night. But something greater had begun, something unseen yet undeniable. A new understanding, born not of politics, but of music and silence. And as Daniel looked around, he knew this silence was the beginning of a storm. Not a storm of destruction, but of change. A silence that would spread beyond this chamber, beyond this planet, through every star and every world touched by the Council's rule. The silence after the song would echo across the galaxy. The silence still held the hall, but it was no longer heavy. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, when the air is fresh, when the world feels different. The council members looked around at one another, and though no one spoke, they all understood. Something inside them had changed forever. Daniel stood in the center, his Xenotone resting against his shoulder. He looked tired, worn, yet strong in a way none of them could explain. He was not a warrior, not a king, not even a leader of his people. And yet he had accomplished what centuries of war, diplomacy, and power had failed to do. The golden-eyed leader finally broke the quiet, his voice deep but softer than ever before. "Human," he said slowly, "your song has cut deeper than any blade. It has bound us in ways we did not know possible." His words carried weight, but behind them was something new: respect. Daniel bowed his head, offering no triumph, only humility, for he knew the Xenotone was not about pride, it was about truth. General Crather, still on his knees, raised his head. His eyes were swollen, his voice rough. "I thought strength was in conquest," he whispered, "but you have shown me a strength far greater." He placed his fist over his heart, not in defiance, but in honor. The sight shocked the council, for never before had Crather bowed to anyone. The winged woman spread her silver feathers wide, a gesture of offering in her culture. The crystal face being pulsed with faint light, his body humming softly like a song of its own. The stone-skinned warrior pulled his daughter close, no longer ashamed to show love. The child looked at Daniel with wide eyes, as though he were not just a man, but a legend. In that moment, the human was no longer alone. He was part of them. The council chamber, once divided by pride and politics, now felt united. Not by treaty, not by fear, but by something far stronger. Every alien heart carried the same echo, the same memory. The music had woven them together into a single fabric, fragile yet unbreakable. They had laughed at him, but now their hearts belonged to his song. Daniel held the Xenotone close, almost afraid to let it go. He wondered if his people on Earth would ever know what had happened here, if they would believe that music, simple human music, had changed the galaxy. He did not need recognition. He only needed the truth to live on. And as he looked into the eyes of the council, he knew it would. The golden-eyed leader raised his hand, his voice firm but different now. "This council will not forget," he said. "This moment will mark the beginning of something new." No one argued. No one resisted, for their pride had been broken and remade. Each species carried scars, but now they shared those scars together. The galaxy would remember this night as the night of the human song. Daniel took a deep breath and stepped back. He bowed once more, then turned to leave the hall. The great doors opened slowly, light pouring in from the world beyond. He walked forward, his footsteps quiet, but every step carried the weight of history. Behind him, silence remained, but it was no longer empty. It was full of hearts forever changed. As he disappeared into the light, whispers spread softly through the chamber. Some called him a prophet, others a warrior without war, others simply called him human. But whatever the name, they all knew one truth. The Xenotone had not just broken their hearts, it had rebuilt them, and the echo of that music would follow them across the stars, forever.